If you have very large levels in your game and the performance is cheeks, here are some ways you can optimize your scenes in hyperPad. Before I start, I want to say huge thanks to SparklingWallGames for giving me permission to look at their project for this video. I'm going to be looking at this project, Norbet The Immortal Crown. I really hope I pronounced that correctly. A link to this project will be in the description if you want to check it out. For objects that shouldn't have collision, like background elements, they should be set to scenery objects. For example, all of these objects on this layer only serve as background content, but they are currently wall objects. These should be set to be scenery objects because they don't need any collision or any physical properties. Any object that only has the purpose of being a graphic should be set as a scenery object. This is just disabling collisions and physical properties of the object. We don't want the game to waste resources computing physics for objects that don't need it. While playing a project, you can go to the pause menu and enable object boundaries to see the collisions of every single physics and wall object. We can see that the ground and all the walls have collisions, and there should be no collisions for any background objects. Use this to check for objects that shouldn't have collisions. If your level is made up of a bunch of tiles like this, and all of them are wall objects, you can reduce the amount of wall objects by turning them into scenery objects, and then you can consolidate a larger wall object into their place. We can see that the creator has already done some of that here with this green rectangle, but we can see that all of the outer tiles here are individual wall objects. What we can do here is turn all of these into scenery objects, and then place a single empty object that can act as a single wall object. So instead of having like 100 wall objects, you can just have a few while still having collisions work exactly the same. So yeah, this is kind of like the first optimization. We want to reduce the amount of wall objects in the scene without actually changing any gameplay. If your level has enemies like this, you probably don't want every single enemy in the scene to be active at all times. Like, these ones all the way over here shouldn't be doing anything until the player is like somewhere near them. If we look at the logic, we can see that the creator kinda thought about this. The enemy only starts moving when it is within 40 meters of the player. But technically, this enemy is still active, even if the player is more than 40 meters away. It still has to deal with animations, collisions, and running logic every frame. Now, this enemy is pretty simple, but if we look at another enemy's logic, we can see that it has way more to deal with. So why waste computing power processing enemies that are too far from the player to make any difference? In the scene, I'm going to add a huge passable wall like this. This is going to act like a loading zone where whenever the player touches it, the enemies are going to be activated. I'm going to add a tag to these enemies. I'll just call it enemy zone 1, and I will add this tag to all of the enemies in this area. Let's dive into the behaviors of this huge wall object. I'll grab the disable object behavior and I'll use the enemy zone 1 tag. What this does is disable those enemy objects when the scene starts so the game stops processing them. Let's grab a collision event behavior and select the player object for the second object. The first object should already be set with the wall object. And then let's plug and enable object behavior under this collision event behavior. And then we can use the enemy zone 1 tag. Make sure the restart behaviors toggle is enabled so the enemy logic is activated. Let's also add a set behavior state behavior and disable the collision event behavior so that the logic is not executed again in case the player happens to collide with this object again. And there we go! So the enemies are disabled and are inactive at this point, but only when the player collides with this invisible passable wall, the enemies become active. Now, this is just a very simple way of simply activating objects when you get close to them. There are many ways you can achieve this, but this is just the gist of it. Your project might be completely different, But if there's one thing you can take away from this part, disable objects when you don't need them to be active, and enable them when they need to be active. Kinda like turning off the lights when leaving the room, and turning them back on when you come back. Don't waste electricity. And that is all of the optimizations I'll show you in this video. Everything I covered is the minimum you need to do to best optimize large levels in your project. Even though I haven't completed this game yet, it was very cool seeing how this project worked behind the scenes. Once again, thanks to SparklingWallGames for letting me use this project for this video. Check out this project in the description if you like. Let me know what types of videos you would like to see in the future, and I really hope you learned something new from this. Thanks for watching, and take care!